love thy neighbor is central to nearly every major world religion and many smaller spiritual traditions as well. And while this message is familiar to us, it remains one of the most challenging calls to action we face. In this community, we often speak of love as compassion in action or as justice embodied, but who is our neighbor? And who is the stranger? In the book, See No Stranger, Valerie Carr offers a powerful answer to these questions. Hint, I mentioned it in the chalice lighting. Of the stranger, she writes, "You are a part of me I do not yet know." This profound statement contains the essence of radical hospitality. To see the stranger as a part of ourselves, to recognize them as an integral piece of the interconnected web of life. This is at the core of what it means to offer true welcome. Carr urges us to move beyond viewing the stranger as other and instead to see them as someone who belongs, someone who carries their own flame and spark of divinity. Similarly, a Unitarian Universalist minister and a past president of the Unitarian Universalist Association once wrote, quote, "If God is inside of us, our neighbor is inside of us as well. Not only inside us, but also among us, between us, intertwined with us, never apart." End quote. And then also the Bible puts it simply and says, "Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself," which again points to the stranger then is not just our neighbor, they are an extension of ourselves. So, what does it mean to welcome the stranger in this context? Well, first, I would say it's an invitation to welcome the stranger within. Those parts of ourselves we've hidden or forgotten, the parts we've cut off from the world. If you, like me, are familiar with your own inner stranger, I encourage you to bring those hidden parts to the table, to this community. Loving your neighbor and inviting in the stranger both begin with accepting and loving all parts of ourselves, of yourself. In Unitarian Universalism, we also often speak of radical hospitality or radical welcome. We like to know ourselves as radical, going above and beyond. And, as much as we like it, we know that these phrases could come to sound simple, but we know that living them out is a demanding and sometimes uncomfortable spiritual practice. Radical hospitality pushes us to offer not just passive acceptance, but active and intentional inclusion. It calls us to extend our embrace across differences. We're most comfortable, I think, in this community across differences of gender expression. Thank you for welcoming me and so many others. Welcoming differences in sexual orientation and race and class, ability, culture. Even across more challenging boundaries such as political views and personal behaviors. So, how then do we embody this vision of radical welcome? How do we shift from seeing the stranger as an outsider to embracing them as a part of ourselves? I think the key lies in reflecting on the moral dimension of our hospitality. Not just opening our doors, but opening our hearts, as I know I love to sing about. Last Sunday, not only did I sing a song about opening our hearts, but I shared a story about a woman on a train with her children who were making what some might call a joyful noise. I'll call it that. It was not at all a disturbance, It was a joyful noise. In our congregation, babies with wiggles and whines are welcomed. But I want us to reflect on how we extend that welcome to people whose differences challenge us more directly. How do we welcome the person who speaks out of turn due to maybe a neurodiverse understanding of communication customs? Or the person who claps and waves their hands enthusiastically doing every single song? How do we welcome? How do we welcome someone who may be marginally housed and carries the sometimes unpleasant scent of hardship? How do we welcome the individual with maybe a large support animal that we're not used to engaging with? And these are not abstract questions. I think many of us have noticed that we've had so many more guests who have become a part of this community. And so these can be real scenarios we face in our sacred spaces. And it is in these moments that radical hospitality transforms from a concept into a spiritual practice. And keep in mind, it's not about being polite or politically correct, which we strive to do. Just so, we are some very polite people and try to get the politics right in our greetings and all of that. But sometimes, and I'm not saying any of us do it, I'm just saying that sometimes we can forget about seeing the humanity and the divinity when we get caught up in the political and politeness. Sometimes. I'm not saying that's happening here. In sometimes missing and seeing the divinity we might miss seeing in those that we find difficult to welcome is the times that we are most challenged to put our love into action. Reverend Dr. Matthew Johnson, reflecting on the work of religious educator C.B. Bill, describes a practice called preemptive radical inclusion. He explains this term as a habit of learning in advance what will foster feelings of inclusion, belonging, and worth, and then taking steps to make that real. This means that we don't wait for someone to show up and then figure out how to include them. Instead, we strive to anticipate their needs and create spaces where all can feel like they already belong. In a similar vein, Angel Kyodo Williams Sensei says, quote, "It's the community's job to figure out how we can stretch into the so-called margins to broaden our understanding and ability to be inclusive. Inclusivity is not how do we make you a part of what we are, but how do we become more of what you are," end quote. This is the essence of radical hospitality, not simply inviting others to join what we already have, but becoming more inclusive, expansive, and compassionate as a result of welcoming others. Of course, this work is challenging. And y'all might be wondering, like, wow, we do this so well, and I just want to use a real-life example of something that maybe y'all might have actually witnessed and did not know that y'all saw happen. So on the 1st of this month, we had a water communion. I don't know how many of y'all were here for that water communion. I see a couple of nods. I see a couple of people were here. And in that water communion, we had a time of mixing the waters. And in that experience of mixing the waters, I brought water from the previous 3 years, I believe, that we'd been keeping in the freezer. And we had them in a bowl. And this year, when a congregant came and poured in their waters, well, many people poured in their waters, but there were a special few who had added a little something extra to their water. They added some medicinal herbs that served as a blessing. And then some other people added some golden stars to their water as a blessing. And when they poured in their waters with our waters, it turned it into a different color. Because that color appeared to be a kind of maybe muddy-ish brown, some of the people who were around as that happened were like, oh, God, what is happening to the, and, but it was, they didn't try to make it, sound that way, but it was a literal example of how we can sometimes be very attached to the look of our water. And it wasn't until that moment when I noticed that someone did not respond with the enthusiasm that I was feeling that I noticed that, oh, there might be some challenge in really welcoming the differences that come with welcoming the stranger. Those things that are unintentional, because again, I say, I find this community to be so deeply welcoming. And this kind of example was just something simple to the subtle ways that we maybe send a different message. Very subtle. The thing that stood out and that I had the wonderful opportunity to express, and I'll just take this moment, it's a small joy of mine. I have been here for the previous 3 water communions and had the great joy of being ordained and welcomed as your minister, very close to all of the water communions. And for this year, when I am your actual minister to be a part of the water communion, and for any member to add something that changed the color of our water, I just gotta say, as the first African American minister of this community, I'm just saying, to have had any influence on turning our waters into a shade of brown, I'm just saying. I felt like it was magic, and then for stars to be added. Y'all, we are doing the work of mingling our waters and welcoming change and difference. And sometimes it's a visible change, and sometimes that change, as we witness it, it might feel a little uncomfortable because it's different. There's a little bit of fear of, wait, were we going to drink that water? That was a question we didn't know. But it's a fair thing when you just don't know. It's like, were we going to use that water to spray? Well, we don't know, but it's okay. We don't have to ask all of those questions then, kind of like the reading. We can just be with what is different, what is new. So this example just shows something that research also shows, that we, not just Unitarian Universalists, but humans generally struggle with inviting difference and change into our communities, even when we really want to. So Robert Putnam, in his book, Bowling Alone, highlights the growing isolation of Americans, he writes. He says that when diverse groups live in proximity, they tend to hunker down. Rather than reaching out to those who are different, the research shows that people actually withdraw. They actually prefer, even though they want difference, to keep holding their waters clear. Is what it is. It's a withdrawal. They spend more time instead watching TV, making fewer friends, and engage less in community activities that invite diversity. So in other words, when faced with actual diversity, many of us retreat rather than embrace the opportunity for connection. This is a research study. Similarly, Paul Lichterman's research in the book Elusive Togetherness shows that churches attempting to bridge social divides often struggle. He says that these churches with good intentions find it difficult to connect with diverse groups because of differences in social customs and communication styles. But Lichterman found that churches that were successful in bridging divides were the ones that constantly reflected on their actions. They didn't simply adopt a set of principles, they continuously evaluated how they talked, interacted, and engaged with others. I think we're a reflective bunch, and we continue to think about how do we talk to each other, how do we interact with each other, how do we engage with one another. And we strive to approach people as partners and not projects. not anybody who needs to change to be like, to meet our values and our principles, but as partners in growing together. Radical hospitality, then, is not an outcome. It is a process. As C.B. Bill reminds us, it is a doorway to justice. It is not just about making our spaces accessible or ensuring that we have signs that say all are welcome. It is about centering the needs of those that have been historically marginalized and taking steps to ensure constant feelings of inclusion, respect, and love. Radical hospitality is justice in action. It is love made visible. So, where do we start? As I've said, we first start by doing the internal work of making space for the stranger within, acknowledging those parts of you that you don't yet know, imagining these hidden aspects of yourself. Then you can truly more easily understand and empathize with the stranger. Then second, we listen. We listen to the stories of others, especially those that have been marginalized or excluded. We must be willing to be changed by what we hear. As Core writes, listening is an act of love. Third, we act. Radical hospitality is not passive. It requires us to take concrete steps to create spaces where all people feel welcomed and valued. This may involve changing how we structure our practices, our services, making our physical space more accessible. I know we have many people who advocate heavily for disability justice and changing our spaces. And finally, we must be willing to be uncomfortable. Radical hospitality often pushes us out of our comfort zones and asks us to welcome those with differences that challenge us, to open ourselves to new ways to being in community. Because we know that when we do, those rewards are immense. We create deeper connections, greater compassion, and a more just and loving world. Wow, so in an early conclusion, I say, friends and family, may we be brave enough to see no stranger. May we open our hearts and minds to the possibility of radical hospitality. And may we always remember that in welcoming the stranger, we are welcoming in the unknown parts of our own divine. Amen.